Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. I got the chance to hang with my friend Jason Chu in Los Angeles, and I knew we were in for a conversation that would challenge, inspire, and empower. Jason, a spoken word artist, historian, rapper, and advocate, has been using his platform to highlight the richness of Asian American history while also confronting the challenges our communities continue to face. As we head into AAPI Heritage Month in May, we discuss history, how so much of our story has been erased, overlooked, or distorted. Jason shares how his work is deeply rooted in uncovering and retelling these histories. One of the things I admire most about Jason is his ability to take these lessons and bring them into the digital space, especially on Instagram and TikTok. In a time when social media can be overwhelming, Jason's reels offer a powerful counterpoint. They educate, empower, and enrich, and they're wildly entertaining. He spoke about the process of distilling complex topics into digestible, visually engaging content that resonates with people from all backgrounds. We also touched on the ongoing struggles faced by immigrants today, especially in this divisive climate. At the heart of our conversation was a simple but urgent message. We all have a role to play. Whether it's through art, activism, education, or simply showing up for one another, we have the power to shape the narrative and push for change. It was so great to record with Jason in person as we literally took a seat on the couch, a nod to his viral couch videos. I'm enjoying these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Jason and everybody out there. We are live in LA. Okay, we're not live, but we're in LA.
We're alive.
We're
alive. You're not seeing this live. We're alive though.
Which is a good thing.
Yes.
Honestly, whenever I travel, sometimes I don't feel alive though. I feel kind of like mostly dead.
Sometimes when I don't travel, I feel mostly dead.
Well, maybe that's the age gap. So I'm very excited because we're doing a Couch Blankie Talk in honor of you being the idea architect of Instagram now, like just blowing up, but also, recreating the scene here. I wanted to be inspired, so I was like, I think maybe I'll have a good podcast and I'll have good ideas if I get my Blankie and I'm like, Jason, give me your energy. Give me all the good ideas.
Here we are. I'm very grateful. It's been really cool. Over the last few months, I've been out sometimes and people are like, oh, do you do that thing on the couch? But the hilarious thing is...
You're like, wait, what thing on the couch?
True. And I don't get... Not that I care about getting recognized, but people don't recognize me unless I'm lying down and under a blanket on a couch.
Okay, this should not be taken out of context. Let's not make these short reels. But what's funny is, and this is a total tangent, but one time I was in the grocery store and someone came up to me. He's like, do you do those YouTube videos? And I'm like, oh God, I'm just like this Asian woman and they're thinking I do these YouTube videos. I'm like, what does this mean? And this is just this guy. And I was like, no, I mean, what do you mean? He goes, well, yeah, they're fitness and martial arts. I was like, oh,
you're like that. What do you mean?
I'm like, oh, you're my fourth viewer. Thank you so much. You're one of my 4 viewers that actually watch. So it was kind of funny. But it is cool that people are not just recognizing you, but responding to this. And I've always obviously been a fan, and I'm a bit biased. Let's be real. You're my brethren, so
yes, facts.
I'm a bit biased, but I mean, just from the AAPI education standpoint, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander too, but like just from that standpoint, like on education, you and I have several talks on how important that is, and just the fact that we are in an era where that scroll, that attention span is exactly what you are giving people enough. You're giving education, bite-sized education, which is all people are usually willing to absorb anyway.
Yeah, and that's what I've been realizing too, is that there's so much history out there that we're not taught. just like you did with Make Us Visible Florida, and our other friends are doing with Red Envelope Collective and API Youth Rising. Like, there's this whole wave of young people, not just Asian American and Pacific Islanders even, but just there's people who are looking for information that they know they're not getting elsewhere. And these days you turn to social media to find it. So it's been really cool to start finding my people and finding my audience on these platforms.
Now, of course, I first met you when I was introducing you always as, he's like
That's
mad,
true.
awesome hip hop artist, rapper, because of course, I love hip hop, and Oscar and I, that is kind of one of the things we bonded over actually was hip hop. And so seeing you embrace that culture, but also thrive at it, and now while you still have your music as your background, this has really formed and shaped and become something of its own. And when you and I were talking, I remember when you said, I'm kind of toying with the idea of idea architect, and I'm like, ooh, I like that. As a writer, as a poet, as a musician, and just being able to put so much into words and their meanings. I would love for you to kind of define that, because you're kind of taking that identity as idea architect, or is it something that you do or who you are? I don't know. Maybe you explain it.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, this is what older rappers do these days. They become podcasters, right? This is what Dumbfounded, Joe Buttons, Noriega, right? Like all these, Cameron, Mace, everyone turns to podcasting. And I think it's because, whatever it is that brought us into rap or we learned through rap, how to talk to a crowd, how to keep things interesting, how to be lively and engaging. Podcasting actually plays to all those same strengths. And so I've been making my history videos and social commentary videos on Instagram and TikTok. I just started a podcast with my buddy Jeff. We knew each other in Beijing when we were both rappers. We were both musicians. He was this sort of pop star assigned to a label. I was out there as a college student. And what we've realized is that all these skills and that same, the kind of hip hop that you and I grew up with, which was very much about like sharing ideas, sharing stories. These days, honestly, what people are looking looking for in their music is a little different than that, right? These days, I like to say the kind of music that works well is like soundtrack music. It's less thinking music.
Yeah.
It's more stuff that it's like, oh, this gives me an energy. And that's fun. That's great as a musician. But as someone who has ideas and stories I wanted to tell, like it says in my Instagram and TikTok bios now, I want to be an idea architect. I want to put ideas together and put together good ideas and break apart bad ideas, and just sort of do more than just, or not even more, just do something different than giving people a soundtrack for their lives. I want to give people ideas that help them understand their lives and the world around them. So that's you've seen the pivot over the last year and a half of being someone who very much what I was making and what I was giving was music. And now it's a little different.
Yes, it's a bit different, but I feel like it's interesting because we all have a foundation. Obviously, for me, my foundation is martial arts, but then how does that then pivot? As you say, I mean, I'm still always going to be a martial artist first, but like that's my foundation for activism or advocacy, or my foundation for when I do any kind of other project, whether it be, acting or dance or something creative, like foundationally, that's me. And would you say like music or hip hop, artistry is like your foundation to all of that? And how does that then benefit this new, I want to say, the idea architect, but how does it kind of play to like, wow, because I have this foundation, that has allowed me to do XYZ with this new era of, the podcast era of Jason Chu. The old rapper. You're not old, first of all, but I know what you mean.
Compared to a 21-year-old, I'm getting up there. But this is kind of the whole thought process, right? Is hip hop is not about music. Hip hop is not about one individual art form, right? Hip hop is a culture. It's a subcultural movement. It's an underground culture. That's attained to mainstream prominence. But growing up hearing, speeches from dudes like KRS-One or Chuck D or, Lupe Fiasco, some of these guys who really think about hip hop. What I always learned was like hip hop isn't something you do, it's something you are. Yes. Right? That's what KRS-One famously says. Hip hop isn't something you do, it's something you live, something you are. And a lot of my life, has been steeped in hip hop culture. Growing up, running around with friends, rapping at school, and then in college when I'd take the metro into the city and go hang out with friends. And R.I.P. Dallas Penn, my sort of OG, who took me to like South Bronx, who took me to Brooklyn Museum of Art, like all these spots. But what I've realized is that how I approach everything, how I approach scholarship, how I approach activism, how I approach podcasting and recording these clips, that's just as much hip hop as rap music, as, graffiti, as DJing, as fashion design. Like hip hop really is anybody who's rooted in and grew up in and learned from that culture, who takes that same ethos and takes the same values into whatever field they go in. So you've got guys like, Jeff Chang, the hip hop scholar. You've got people, like Lupe Fiasco, or people don't know, Chameleonaire wound up becoming, he became an investor. He does VC work, after he blew up. He was actually an early investor in Lyft. Okay. And, people like that take hip hop culture into whatever arena it may happen to be. Somebody like Steve Stout, right? Took hip hop into marketing and into management and so on.
Yeah. And as a huge hip hop fan, and like you said, growing up in a specific era, there was just this connectivity to a world that you felt just comfortable in, but also like, it sounds so cheesy in a way, but like understood, or like just like you felt like a belonging and a place. And I always kind of feel sad because I definitely wasn't an MC. I definitely couldn't rap. I was like, and I can't do any graffiti art. And I think the closest thing would be like being a b-boy, b-girl. I was because I always wanted to do like the windmill and then, wanted to be able to break. But I was still never proficient, right? But I was like, I guess I'm just a fan. I guess I can't even claim to be in hip hop culture. But
you look at someone like a Fab Five Freddy that everybody knows is like, that dude's hip hop culture.
Yeah.
He's not a rapper. He's not all these, he's a huge part of the culture. And I think, in our sort of commercial society, you tend to identify culture by the commercial prospects that people have with it. True. But hip hop society, that kid who grows up in Brooklyn and can't really dance or isn't a really good visual artist, but they're in the midst of the culture. That's just as much being hip hop, right?
True. So if Oscar were here, he'd be like, "Yo, are you calling me out because I can't dance or I can't rap and I'm from Brooklyn?"
And we're all gonna and nobody is gonna say to his face that Oscar is not hip hop.
Oh
right?
No! Every week, he very, very much had to really work for every dollar, every cent, right? And was like, oh man, I'm saving up to get The Source this week. It's coming out, so I can see who got 5 mics on the next album. Growing up in school, it was like a really big deal. It was something so important, and so there's definitely that aspect, but. I want to kind of talk about the reels because you and I have talked, social media and all this stuff over the last, couple years, and my comprehension of it is consistently pretty low. And the understanding, I even said, hey, how long is a reel? Like, I still don't even know. I'm like, they're trying to make my reel. I'm like, oh, this is over. Like they're rejecting it. They're like, no, this isn't happening. I'm like, yeah, but my dad did 800 kicks. I want to show all of them because he does that. But so how are you able to fit all of the content in? Because there's some of the subjects that you've had reels on, and I think people don't realize the amount of research. They probably think you're just like, so Vera Wang, boom. Oh, hey, this happened. Oh, and I'm like, oh my God, there's like books and documentaries and so much research on all of the subject matter that you choose. And I think people think you just get up there and use your Jason Chu rapper prowess and you're like, I'm going to just spit out a bunch of lyrics about this person. But can you tell everybody like the amount of research that goes in, and then how are you able to kind of edit down?
Yeah. So honestly, the bulk of the work is in the research. I spend a lot of time actually researching and writing the scripts. Because when I shoot these reels, I actually have the script pulled up right there in front of me on my laptop. And it's easily 45 minutes to an hour for each one. These 80, 90-second videos. But I want to make sure that I'm getting in the right information. I'm never going to get in all the information, but I want to make sure that what I'm saying is sourced. And people can't tell, but when I put up these photos and these images in these reels, they're all sourced from primary sources. Or if they're not, they're just funny clip art. It's either hilarious watermarked clip art or it's primary sources. And so I'll spend the extra 10 minutes to look for... Okay, so here's an example. There was a reel that I did on the Donut King, right? This Cambodian immigrant. He was in the Cambodian military, and he was married to an upper class woman. And so during the Khmer Rouge's purge, they fled to America. When they came to America, there was a church that sponsored them. There was a minister at a church that sponsored their family to become green card holders and citizens. None of the interviews or the press stories about this guy who became the Cambodian Donut King mentioned the name of his sponsor. But I tracked it down because I looked for the church that sponsored him where he worked as a janitor. And then I knew the years he was there. And then I searched for the name of their pastor, their minister during that time. And then I Googled that name and the area. I think it was maybe Buena Park. But I searched for the guy's name, and a completely unrelated newspaper clipping came up of him at like an art gallery. And so when you watch that reel, for like a second and a half, this old white dude from like the late 1960s, early 1970s pops up. But it's actually the guy that sponsored this Cambodian man's family, that went with him to his job interview at Winchells, where he got accepted to donut management, to managing a Winchells location, which started his whole empire and started all of the Cambodian donut shops in California.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that I probably no one notices, but it's fun and it's important to me that when I show these things, I'm not just showing clickbait, or I'm not just kind of, I'm
the first two lines of Wikipedia.
Exactly.
You're basically an investigative journalist at this point too. Like, you have to do your due diligence.
Exactly. I try to, because, and sometimes I get one or two things wrong. Like there was, one reel that I did about Jesse Glover, right? Bruce Lee's, one of his first students in America, one of the first Sifus that he trained. And unfortunately, I got one photo wrong where it was another one of his students. And that was a while ago. And so because of mistakes like that, I've learned that if I put something out, even if it's something seemingly minor, it's something that 99% of people won't know. Right. It's important, like for Jesse Glover's descendants or people that he trained,
of course,
them to see that. So all of that work goes in before I even lie down on the couch. That's all me sitting at my laptop at my desk writing.
Yes.
And then once I trim it down to a tight 90 seconds, then everything else comes after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you make it look easy, which is how I know it's so freaking hard.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know how media actually works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so like the fact that you make it look so easy, and one is, of course, as a rapper and having just an amazing ability to speak publicly and just give commentary and things like that, like that part to me, I'm like, oh, you don't even need, you're good. You could just probably do it. One take wonder, right? But I think that it's not enough emphasis goes towards lauding your research, like you said. And of course, we all get stuff wrong. Once in a while, we say the wrong name. We've made quotes, we're like, oh crap, wrong author. Ouch. Yeah, but we're human. So I think that's okay. And the fact that you admit that, I find it so refreshing, because there are people in media like, oh no, won't take accountability for errors or mistakes, instead of just saying, hey, yeah, I'm not perfect. Have you found, because you do your due diligence in your research, that, I mean, not to disparage any of these different sites or
course, yeah.
Google searches or Wikipedia, but like, have you found that, oh wait, I looked into this and then I looked into this and I realized the first thing I found was actually inaccurate. And because I did a little bit more digging in, I was like, oh, what you first Google on the internet might not actually be true.
Yeah, that's very true. Because a lot of times, right, like, everybody says, right, there's like three sides to a story. There's your side, there's their side, and then there's the truth. And that's accurate. And, I think a lot of people covering things, I will say that a lot of journalists, like proper journalists, like people who have editors and have a standard, for reporting, they do well. But what I'd say is that there's so many stories from Asian American history. There's so many stories from API history that are not well covered. And so you don't get, 5 different sources. Not even primary sources. You don't even get 3 or 4 secondary sources who've reported on it. You get 1 or 2 websites that may be not super well referenced. They're just talking about what they knew, and so reconstructing things from that is really tough. And in the end, frankly, I don't always have the time in my reels to present everything that I can. Everything that I could, everything that came up in the research.
Yes, of course.
So I have thought about, I actually have a call with a certain platform tomorrow talking about potentially like finding ways to show my work, So like creating something for people who see the content and want to go a little more deeply into it.
Yes, the deep dive.
Yeah, to have a platform where they can be like, oh, he actually found all of this. And, maybe 40 to 60% of it made it into the reel, and here's the other part. So I'm looking at ways to do that. But, yeah, that's the interesting thing about, as you very well know, so much of ANHPI history is formally erased. It's not acknowledged. And so you find it, people always ask me, where do you find this? And it's like, dude, because I've been around people, I know you and your father and his legacy. I know, and I've hung out with Mountain Brothers or Yellow Rage or, Nobuko Miyamoto or, some of these figures. And I had the benefit of doing Asian American studies in graduate school.
Yeah.
And by digging in all those ways, I think people don't know how much information there is out there. It's just not easy to find. It's not even erased. It's not even invisible. It's just, it's not put in a textbook, or it's not, there wasn't a blockbuster film about it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I love that there's small steps forward to correct that. And actually you're a huge integral part of that, because honestly, to be able to reach the masses and the general public and the variance of ages that you do, and people who aren't still in school that maybe will get a chance, because hey, in Florida, like that's happening. It's happening now. They're like this summer, we're actually already getting implementation done, right? So it's one thing to pass a law, and then it's another for shit to actually happen after that. Because I don't know if people realize that, but once a law is passed, that doesn't mean like it gets, implemented. And you have to keep pushing the ball. You have to keep pushing that. And I'm just really fortunate that the work I did led to MUV getting a seat at the table. And so like now this happens, but a lot of the audience, they're out of school. They're not going to be able to go to just college to pick up an Asian American studies, or, I'm glad to hear that even existed. Had I even known that might have existed I don't think it did when I was in college, to be honest. It was the 90s. I'm going to date myself. It is true. So, but I don't even think that was an option. They had Asian studies, which is
very different.
Which is very different.
The opposite in some ways.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is where there is also such a disconnect, because of course this is probably going to get released around, Asian American Heritage Month and AAPI. So it's where, this is the one month we get to talk about Asian Americans, by the way, and this is the only month. It's the only month we're allowed.
The problem with APA Heritage Month is that we're usually not talking about Asian American history. We usually talk about Asian culture.
Yes.
And this is the problem. People love Asian and Pacific cultures because it lets them see us as foreign.
Yes.
People love lion dances, and they love hula dance, and they love, Diwali. because all of that makes Asia this interesting, fun, loud, colorful culture far away.
Yes.
And when you talk about Asian and Pacific American identity as a racial identity, people get really leery because now you're talking about massacres.
And uncomfortable.
Right?
Yeah.
Now you're talking about violence. Now you're talking about systemic racism. And that all makes people shrivel up. And this is the thing. I want to challenge listeners, perhaps, or friends, when we talk APA Heritage Month, how much are we actually talking about Asian and Pacific Islander Americans? And how much are we talking Asian and Pacific culture?
Yes.
And if it's Asian and Pacific culture, that's not actually APA Heritage Month. That's just celebration. Shout outs to our favorite theme parks, but that's Epcot, right?
Yes.
Epcot, it's showing you the world out there.
The World Showcase, yes.
Which isn't what Asian Pacific America is.
And it's also not historical. It's not about the history, and it's not about
exactly
the journeys. And I think there's a distinction. I'd love for you to school me because of my age, I think I always say AAPI. But then there's
ANHPI,
I'm like,
APIDA,
what are
there's
all the things? Tell me all the things. And does it really, quote unquote, matter? Or we just do the best we can?
Yeah. Okay. So Asian America started in 1968. Before that, we were called Orientals.
Yes.
And there was a group of students who were part of a protest movement in the Bay Area. And they said, Oriental makes us sound exotic and foreign.
Yeah.
So let's find a new term. And with their friends, it was a bunch of Filipino and Japanese and Chinese Americans. And they sat down and they said, you know what, let's be Asian American. And no one had called anything Asian American before that. There were Chinese Americans, but there were no Asian America because our communities didn't get along. But they wanted to fight together. So it was Asian America. And then, in the 80s and 90s, people started realizing that a lot of the same issues were shared between Asian and Pacific Islander communities. What the U.S. military did in Okinawa, the same thing as in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Hawaii. And so they said, okay, for those reasons, we got some of the same issues. Let's combine. So it became Asian American Pacific Islander, or Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. So by the 1990 census, there was a box you could tick that said Asian and Pacific Islander as a racial grouping.
Yeah.
And that was important because there were certain issues that we shared and that we wanted to fight for together. People have also come up with Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, right? Desi being sort of the general term for people from South Asia, darker skinned South Asian communities. Frankly, these days, I tend to use Asian American.
Okay.
Just because a lot of Pacific Islander friends, they've said, our communal issues, the things we're dealing with, our stereotyping is very different, right? You meet a Samoan dude and what they deal with, usually, generally, like larger dudes, brown skin, very different from what you or I deal with as a lighter skinned East Asian, even though you're also Caribbean, in your cultural ancestry.
Yeah.
But I tend to use Asian American when I'm talking about Asian American things. And then if there's something that specifically overlaps between Asians and Hawaiians, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, I'll use that.
Okay.
If we want to specifically call out Desi, because a lot of people don't include South Asians in Asian American stuff.
Yes.
And it makes sense because culturally, socially, there's different perceptions. But what people don't understand is all of these acronyms and these phrases, they don't exist for no reason. They exist for a purpose.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're doing something where Asian American and Pacific Islander issues overlap, absolutely use AAPI.
Yeah.
If you're using if you're just talking about Asian Americans, talk about Asian American. If you're talking about East Asian American, talk about that.
Yeah.
But there's a whole vocabulary within it that, if you don't know enough to learn it, that's fine. Maybe it doesn't apply to you. But if you want to be having these conversations, it can only help us to speak with precision.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny, every time I am asked to do any kind of, hey, come to our corporation or organization and speak during Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I'm like, okay, who is the audience?
Exactly.
Which one do I use? And I get friends that text me too. They're like, hey, I'm speaking. I'm a journal. They're journalists, and they're like, which one do we use now? I don't want to offend anybody. And it's like, and then I always get acronyms confused because in my head I start going, wait, is it
which one is
it?
Yeah.
And then I'm completely off. But you're right. I think there is a relevance. And even when we were doing, say, like our coloring book for Make Us Visible, it was like, who are we able to include? We don't want to generalize, and then we don't want to put on the book Native Hawaiian if we weren't able to find representation. And then we also, each of our Make Us Visible chapters, for example, decide how they're going to write their bill. If they're going to say AAPI, or they're going to say NHPI, or they're going to say, they're going to decide based on also who is in their advocacy group. Like, do they feel like there's enough representation to speak on behalf of or trying to be inclusive of? But I think what's also key is, yes, we need to speak with precision, but also that if someone is actually intending to do good, and we're just trying to move that bar forward, and we're doing the best, and the work is being done. Like, let's also not be alarmists and get so caught up in pointing fingers and bringing advocacy groups down when they're just trying to do good work, right? To me, I'm a action-based type of person, so I'm like, look, if you're doing the work, you're doing the work. If you don't have it all right, and yes, we need to speak with precision, it's not that that's secondary, but I always have respect when people are actually trying to move the needle versus just talking about it, right?
Anybody who's ever done something to help someone else is, in my mind, in a different tier and category than anyone who's just talked online. Like, all this stuff, like anybody who just makes content or just replies and comment, like, amazing. Like, have you ever fed or clothed or comforted somebody who is hurting? If you've done that, awesome. You're already better equipped to tangibly help people than someone who just gets mad and scolds people online. And usually that's why when I make content, frankly, I always try to present information not as this is what you're getting wrong or this is what this person has done wrong. It's got to be more about this is why this matters, right? And I think a lot of people get mad at stuff like pronouns or stuff like acronyms, not because it's become this buzzword. I had a friend point out that, if we're talking about DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. Which one don't you like, right? What part of that don't you like?
I'm confused, to be quite honest. I'm very, very confused and disappointed. But it's, like you said, which one of those is a problem?
Yeah, right? And that's the thing, right? When we let things just become buzzwords, instead of, and this happens, to be fair, on both sides of the political aisle, because, politics is different from community service and advocacy.
Yes.
Right? People use these buzzwords and phrases to signal to audiences that I'm on your side. But really, in the end, this is the question, like, who are you helping to include? Who are you helping to make the playing ground more equal, more fair for them?
Yes.
Who are you embracing when you say diversity? If you can answer those questions, I think you're miles ahead of anyone who just is triggered against or honestly for DEI, right?
Let me tell you, I actually believe we're in the situation we're in because, and I'm obviously everybody knows, a very progressive person, but at the same time, I am frustrated that there are parts of politics in which we get so caught up in that part of it, and then we lose focus. I'm like, you've lost focus and you're caught up in the words, or you're caught up in being so angry over this, where it's like, this is where I'm all shut up and do the work kind of thing. I was like, yes, we could complain and talk about this and make posts and be angry, but it's like, if you're actually doing the work, the people that are so afraid of these buzzwords and don't understand it and everything, it's like we would find that center ground a lot quicker if the people who are for DEI don't don't make the people who don't understand it feel also stupid. Like, why don't you just actually take time to explain it and have a conversation versus just pointing fingers and telling people that they're, horrible or morons or whatever? Because I often find through like a simple conversation, a lot gets fixed. And the fact is there's no good conversations happening. It's sides and it's tribalism. And I get that too, because I certainly am guilty, of being very, very tribal. And I think, though, that the reason we are in such a divisive time is because it's just gotten too much of pointing fingers and just saying, I'm like, if we were all actually just doing the work, we wouldn't have time for that. It's like back in the day in the martial arts era, right when the internet started, people started to get online. They're like, ooh, there's these forums. We can just like talk about Kung Fu. I'm like, and I was like,
instead of training, we can talk. Man,
I was like, we'll
Wing Chun is so much better than Jeet Kune Do because it's authentic.
And we're talking about, our school, we train. I'm like, are you really training, or are you sitting online behind a computer right now? Shut up and do the work.
Bro, your comments tell me that for the last 7 hours you've been at your computer. So whatever style that is.
Yeah. And this is where I think this comes to like the grumpy old Sifu Mimi thing with, social media and blah, 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 is because when that first started, there was a lot of online chatter, that was back in the day where there were still Kung Fu magazines, and I would be in some of them. Of course, my father always, but like, who is this girl? Why is she deserved? A lot of criticism. So I've dealt with that my whole life, and I'm fine. But it was kind of interesting where people said so many things about me without knowing me. And I was like, wow, this is what I see of social media, internet, and like that door being opened. That was my first experience.
Well, which was super interesting, right? Because you actually were very visible and very public at a time when social media was very new. Right. Like Mulan was what, 90, 98, 96?
Yeah, 98, 99, yeah. So 96 I started working on it, so yeah.
Yeah, right? And that's right when the first wave of forums and chat rooms was there. And that must have been nuts, because I would say, at least now, right, being a social media personality, being on social media, you kind of know, there's been 20 years now of cyberbullying. There's been 20 years of being doxxed. When you had you're a very visible woman of color in media at a time when the internet was just winding up and no one had ever been mean or been, like critical in that invisible, anonymous way. What was that like for you in 98 when Mulan comes out in 99 and you're out there as an Asian woman in media?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think I've been asked in different ways, but not as articulately or as in the way that you just put it, because I don't know that I thought of it as, wow, this is the first opportunity to be cyberbullied. Yay, I'm like victim number one, I'm patient zero. So, but what's interesting is I think because I am Grandmaster Chan's daughter ever since forever, I've always had a critical eye, whether it be a visiting master from China or whether it be my own parents comparing me to, the kid in the Kung Fu, world over in Asia that only gets fed a bowl of rice if they've trained 8 hours, like, how come you're not as good as them, right? So I think I've always had a bit of a critical eye on me, but the difference was these strangers that never even met me. It was really infuriating.
Yeah, because that's something that's very social media, right? Critique and criticism as it always existed.
Yes, especially if you're Asian, you got...
True. Criticism based on 15 seconds of
saw you
your
in a magazine.
face and one thing you do.
Yes.
That was new.
That was new. That was new, and the depth of which those conversations were going on and on and on, and what I was wearing or how I looked, how much weight I gained or didn't get,
oh my God.
It was kind of, it got really cruel, and of course it got really crude, because at that time I was like, 19, 20. Yeah, I was young, right? I was
you were a kid, but you were illegal, which was a whole internet thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then of course, like being in shows like Mortal Kombat or Sheena, where of course the clothing is a certain type of thing, whether you're doubling or whether you're playing your own character. It's like, there is the amount of criticism of, because you do this, now you can't also be a martial artist, or you're in a movie.
Fake martial art. You got a lot of fake martial artists.
Well, it becomes like, she's now, doing this Hollywood thing, and that means I can't possibly, all the 20 years of training, that's negated because I've chosen to do a TV show or something, right? Or whatever the case may be. I could say something in an article, which we all know that journalists don't get it all right, so you're taking out of context a lot, but it was just like every single piece, word, everything just being so dissected by people who didn't know me was very jarring. And I wish I was in therapy at the time, but I think, thank goodness, I was like, fuck this, I'm just gonna go train and like focus my energy on what I can control and do.
Yeah.
And I think if I wasn't a traditional martial artist and I didn't have that grounding, it probably would have, not that it didn't cause self-esteem and issues, but it probably could have really taken a turn for another woman in that situation that maybe didn't have the same grounding, but then suddenly just got criticized online for whatever reason, right? And so I think I'm fortunate in a sense that I had a really strong community base. I had my temple of just having that connectivity. But yeah, it was not cool at all. And I can speak about it more as like, an adult, a much older adult.
Which when you were 19.
It was different. And then you also, as a woman, you say something, you're being dramatic or defensive and you can't defend yourself, or you're being aggressive, or you're being loud, or whatever the case may be. So like when you stand up for yourself as a strong, independent woman, then that's actually frowned upon. Or it's interesting because it's just a double standard, right? Because if a man were to be like, F off, like, you don't talk, the result is different. The reaction is different. So yeah, it was an interesting time for sure. But I think this is why I have this hesitancy towards embracing the social media so lovely as you have, but I see how then it can be harnessed for good. I'm like, look at the work Jason's doing. It's amazing. And you're educating people. And I love that you're going to do this deeper dive possibly, because I was going to ask you, like, are there things in your research where you're like, man, I wish I had 8 more reels to kind of part 1, part 2, or like, are there subject matters that you've come across that you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to do this?
Honestly, there's so much. It's, I'm very grateful on Instagram. I think I'm at the time of this taping, like something like 76,000 follows. On TikTok, I've got 30,000. And I'm grateful for those platforms, but the nature of the algorithm is that content has to be like a minute to 90 seconds. And there's so much that gets left in my notes and just cut out because it's like, this is really an interesting detail.
Yeah.
But it's not gonna, I've got to be streamlined when I make my short form content.
And you have a kind of a formula for it now, like what will kind of be.
I can tell when I'm getting a little too in depth.
Wow.
Like what works on Instagram, on TikTok is you got one core idea and you build information around it. And that's been really fun learning how to do that. And I'm grateful and I'm still doing that. But I am starting to think whether that's going to YouTube or another longer form platform or building out, a newsletter or something with more depth. But there is, I'm currently working on a book proposal, and that's something that hopefully it takes some of the stories that I've shared on Instagram and TikTok and expands them. It adds commentary, it adds more context, and I'm really excited and I'm hopeful that it turned out that the way I do this works really well on Instagram and TikTok.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that different versions of that can work on other platforms with different styles, whether that's a book, whether that's a long form video essay. Yeah, I'm very excited and interested to be trying to dip my toes in some of these other waters and seeing what works.
I think it's so important. I've been having these repetitive conversations of the fact that we aren't learning from our history or learning history, but even the history we do know, how we're not learning from it.
Yeah.
And I am very fortunate to have traveled the world, and every time we get in a position where America has embarrassed me, but also we done bad. I'm taking accountability. I'm a part of this country, and I think we've made really bad decisions, and I think we're doing really bad things right now. And it's really hard to travel internationally and have these conversations with people where they're like, why is this really happening? Why is this happening over here?
It's hard enough to go to Canada.
Well, we can't go to Canada right now. I don't want my cousins. Do you guys want us to visit? But they don't want to visit here, right? And I get it. Why would you want to go anywhere where you feel it will be hostile or where you feel unwanted or where the leader of your country has said like horrible things about your country? I mean, we're talking from 2016. It's like shithole countries, right? Why would anybody feel comfortable? But so it's so important, even more now than ever, like these little 80-second reels, if that's all people are willing to listen to historically, like you are doing some fun stuff. Of course, you get the pop culture and we learn about donuts, but you also tackle Japanese incarceration. You also tackle, like you said, the things that people shy away from during, AAPI Heritage Month with is, let's just talk about Lunar New Year and lion dancing because that's fun. It makes people feel good, but we don't want to talk about the massacre that happened.
Exactly.
We don't want to talk about the railroad workers and the millions of stories that came out of that. That's just like one little snippet. That's a reel of like how many people's stories in there like are intertwined that teach us so much more, right?
Yeah.
So it's like these histories in every background, right? Not just AAPI, like all the backgrounds, like they all the different races and the different cultures, like all the people here who are immigrants, which is everyone except the natives. Let's be real.
Well, okay, everyone except the natives and the people who are brought here.
And the people, yes,
right?
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to correct that too, because you're kind of like where we're at. But the point being, how far back are we as immigrants going to be? Actually, like, no, we were here first. We were here for, like, how far back do we get to go before we get invalidated as being an American, right? Because this is actually happening. And it's been frustrating to just see all these dynamics. And this is why I know it feels like, I'm just doing the 70-second thing. And I know that you know the importance of it, which is why you put the amount of work that you do. But some of the ones you put out, and like you said, I know maybe the more in-depth don't get the hits, but I would say, if it resonates with the right person and then they take that and they have a conversation and then maybe even put action behind it and something happens and it inspires someone, it's like the work you're doing is so important.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. I'm very gratefully at a time when, the ones that really go, the fun ones, here's where Vietnamese nail salons started. Here's where Cambodian donut shops started.
And artists for Disney.
Here's the Disney artist, who created Bambi's World. It was a Chinese guy. Those go great. But even the ones that don't go super viral, still, when I think about it, if I can have 30,000 people learn something about college admissions, or, 28,000 people... Sorry, I hit this. 28,000 people watch a reel on, the opium wars. That's 28,000 people who might have not known that before or might not have seen that perspective on it before. And I'm grateful that even the ones that don't go super viral and expand my audience, there's still a core of people that are like, hey, this guy says interesting stuff. I want to see what he says. The algorithm still gives these sort of core listeners that. And I'm really grateful for that. But, that, and that's one interesting thing that I've seen about your life and your work is that, you were very focused on just your immediate community. And you've built up Wa'alam and you've built up your, you've got this incredible in-person community. It's not like you set out, you did the Hollywood thing, but and then going back home, going to Florida was kind of just like you investing in your family business and your immediate community of people who are passionate and interested about martial arts. And we've talked, offline and before we recorded about the ways that the Wa'alam community has wound up really being this sort of microcosm of everything going on in America.
Yeah.
You've got not obviously it's Asian culture, Chinese culture, but you've got, black and white and Latino and all kinds of students. And you were telling me, and I'd love for your podcast to hear about the recent political stuff that's going on has impacted the Wallam family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think this is why I get so frustrated, and I'm like, I need everyone to we need to be better, right? We need to be better learners, listeners, and be able to take some action. But it's been frustrating to see how our community, because like you said, I came home to my temple because I did not have a successful time in Hollywood in the 90s, and I didn't have the grit to hang on to it. But I think ultimately I know where I needed to be. And being in that community, we are so connected that it is a Wallam family. We don't say like, oh, these are just our students. Like everybody calls each other by familial names, just like a Kung Fu family, right? It's older brother, older sister, younger brother, younger sister. Your Sifu is your teacher, your parent, more than that, right? And so like we get very invested in the lives of these humans. And, one of our members even like that we've known over 30 years. Right. So we know these people. We know people really well. Like just recently, his sister was detained. And this is something that's a legal permanent resident. Yeah. And this was before we're actually started to see it in the news of other people this was happening to. Or like
the first wave.
The first wave. This was before it
February?
Was in early February. Yeah, in February. So this was like happening to people And I'm like, how long before everybody starts to go, I know someone that has been detained without cause, without a reason. Like these are legal residents that have their paperwork, that are not criminals, that were just coming home from vacation, and without saying any names or anything, but like basically was detained, and family didn't know where she was for 96 hours. Yeah. Phone was taken away, and then shipped off to a really horrible detention center in a really racist town that's really difficult for family to go to purposely. So I actually just learned about this because we've been following and trying to find out what's happening. Like, where is she? How's it going? Getting calls or contact is minimal. There's no process. Yeah. So the frustration is that, not that the prison system, that's a whole nother conversation, but at least you know what to do, right? You go to jail, then there's a bail thing, there's this, then you get a lawyer, you get your call. Like, there's a process.
You can argue very well that immigration enforcement is so much, I don't want to say more cruel, but it's so much harder to work through than prison and jail. Because prison and jail, it's very clear and
there's
somewhat transparent. Yeah. Yes, but this immigration detention, they could literally be shipped halfway across the country.
Yes.
And you only know the state they're in. You don't even know which facility.
Yes, there's no process, and there's no precedent really for how it's being done. And this was done through Custom Border Patrol, right? And so it's a matter of, in my head, this is my words and my objective, just how I'm thinking. It's like, you're empowering people to take someone's life and completely in your hands. Like, you have now this unlimited power. Yeah. And that is dangerous, to empower people that don't have qualifications to do the things they're doing, the information, or it's scary, because this is how innocent people maybe making a quota and get disappeared, and then get sent to a place that they're now in a room with several other women, and then because they're filling these facilities, get moved to smaller rooms with the same amount of women, sharing one bathroom, sharing one shower, and it's like more and more people with smaller and smaller conditions, really horrible living conditions. I was told like they're allowed to get like one Amazon book direct at a time, and then they can't even they have to wait until that gets returned, or only on the inside. I mean, this is they're in this. It makes it seem like a movie with maximum security, where a book is a commodity, and this is inhumane. First of all, what's happening, and to someone who didn't do anything wrong. Like, there's no reason that she was detained other than probably how she looked. Her name triggered something, and that, she is, of course, an immigrant, but a legal resident for over 40 years in the country. Yeah. So, like, what country are you trying to deport her to? This is her country now. And the fact is, they are trying to get them to sign away their rights and to try to get them to self-deport. That is happening.
Right, because that's something people don't understand is the pressure that's applied to you when you're in these detention centers, right? Yes. It's not just, they're not being nice. They're not saying, hey, if there's a problem, or oh my God, if there's a mistake, you're supposed to be here. Like, hey, let's get on that right away for you.
No.
Like, not only do they not care, they're still trying to push them out, right? What's going on?
Yeah,
with that?
So they just said more and more people are coming every day. And so all the people with green cards, they don't have, like I said, a process. It would almost have been better if she had been wrongfully imprisoned in jail. She probably would have had,
because at least then a lawyer,
there's a lawyer
can
go in and whatever, there would be a thing. So now, like, she has this lawyer, but they don't even have a precedent for how do we get these people out of this detention center? What are the qualifications? What are the checks and balances that need to happen? What paperwork do you need to show? There's nothing it's hard. And I said, I said, how long is this going to take? They're like, it could take a year. They said there's been people in there that they've met that's been in there for 15 months, and there's like 19-year-olds in there. And they said that there's no answers. There's no court date set, and they won't set dates. And it's very slow to materialize. But the reality is also, not only are they kind of making it hard for them to talk to their lawyers, but making it almost impossible for families to visit. Because these are all mostly people of color, of course, right? Put into a position where it's 4 hours away, whatever city this is being held in is 4 hours away from any, whatever it is, train station, plane station, airport,
right,
whatever.
Rural.
It's rural.
They put prisons in far off rural areas. Yeah.
In a racist town where there are, I'm going to say, racist officers that are there to
harass
make
families
it
as
very,
they come.
very scary for you to go to point A to point B. And they called it, the words used was, this is a dangerous trip to take to try to see their family member, just to offer support. And it's cruel and it's frustrating. And like the fact that we have like a Wallam family member that we know that is going through this is insane, because we operate at, in our Wallam family as like, we're all here learning martial arts, but we're a family, and we are able to leave everything outside of this place. Like, we don't bring in negativity, and everyone there is like working towards a common goal. And then it's crazy that as soon as we step outside of that, it's like, wow, do we know what and this is why I'm frustrated. I'm like, do we know what we have done? Do Americans know what they have done by, from the election to now? Like, all of things should not be a surprise. We were told these things would happen.
Yeah.
It was written out, it was laid out, and it's happening very clearly. And it is heartbreaking, but infuriating. And just hearing like all the things in updates of what's happening, like, of course, the visits are also short and expensive. It's just making it such a horrible situation for the families of, and also for the people that are being detained. And they're trying to get them, just like in the Japanese internment camps, they're trying to get them to sign away their citizenship or their rights to whatever rights they had. And there are people there that don't speak English as their first language. That's probably I don't know if they're being tricked or what, but like, you can imagine the pressure.
They're definitely being handed paperwork in English.
If you're there and you're not having a good time and you have to wait however long just to use a bathroom in front of, like, you're in this crazy world, like maybe signing something saying you don't have to be there anymore is enticing, you know? So I don't know, but like, they're definitely pressuring people to do that. And it's really, really frustrating.
So what I'm hearing you say is, if you've ever watched The Shawshank Redemption and you liked that movie, you should be against detention of green card holders, right? That's what I'm hearing. Because the hilarious thing, right? So many people say, oh man, you know, I really care about, like that story that I saw was so powerful. And the question is, when it happens right around you, will you do anything? Will you even care or speak up?
Yeah.
Or will you just think, oh, you know, at least these are the bad ones.
Exactly.
Because that's the thing. When it's the Shawshank Redemption and it's Tim Robbins and he's, playing this innocent white dude, so many people I've talked to are like, oh, Shawshank Redemption's in my top 5 movies of all time. Bro, the Shawshank Redemption is happening around us today, but it's happening to Filipino aunties and it's happening to Guatemalan kids.
Yes.
Are you about it, or was that just a fun movie that you could watch?
Exactly. Yeah. Because it felt like a movie. I was like, we're in the movie. We're in the dystopian future. Like, I love dystopian future books. I can't read them now. It's too on the nose. And I was speaking also with my really good friend who was my student for like 20 years, and now he does my nails.
Hey.
Nail salon, yes. Love. Shout out VV Wellness in Orlando. But you told me, like, I think there was a sweep through, ICE came through for the Vietnamese nail salon workers because it's an easy target of where they know there are immigrants that don't speak great English. And I don't have the exact number, but it was like in the tens of thousands. It was like, oh yeah, there was like a raid, I guess they call it a raid or whatever. And I'm like, I've been trying to get like the red card info out to people, and like people need to know what to say, what to do. And even then, I don't know, I don't know that it helps or whatnot, but like we're hearing more and more how this is affecting someone and I want to know for people that think they support what's happening in this, well, maybe this helps my tax cut or whatever it is, reasoning you have. Your fellow humans are being treated like animals, and that's not democracy. And that is not the country that I believe that I want to be in, and what my father fought to come to the land of the free and opportunity. It is not what I've had in my head my whole life of like my identity, and it's very frustrating.
And your stocks and Bitcoin are down. So that's not even a good excuse. Trust me, I own Bitcoin. That's not even looking good either. So it really was for nothing.
It was for nothing. It was for nothing. This is bad. This is bad. And we're only in like the first like 90 days. Like, how much more can we take? I don't know. I mean, I only can hope that everything is cyclical, and when we hit a point, the people will speak, the people will speak out, the people will take action. And I hope that humanity can come together, right? Because it's like when we see each other as fellow humans and we have that empathy, we hear stories about people that we feel connected to. I hope there can be change, but this is scary. It is a really scary time.
And it's impacting something as precious to a community as the Walam Temple, as the Walam family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, who, we are a pillar in our community. Like, we are part of America. We are Americans. Big surprise, everybody. Like, we look like this, but we are Americans. But yeah, and the thing is that's great is in our immediate circle of community, we feel that love, right? But it's like, then again, within that community, how many people are on board with other things that happen because it doesn't affect them? But I tell you, wait until it's only going to come to where you do know somebody that you love that it affects, or whatever it's called, the circle of life. No, it comes in closer, right? Like concentric or whatever. I don't know the vocabulary, but it becomes where now it affects me, and not that it should be that way, but that's my only hope is as soon as it starts to really affect people. I mean, the eggs alone, right? The $10 eggs should be our first, hey, this is affecting me now.
Eggs, Canadian maple syrup, and shout outs to DJI, the Chinese manufacturer of great drones and Bluetooth microphones. All right, all of this, whether you like it or not, we live in a global world now.
Yeah.
And so many of the things that we enjoy in America, around the world, come from that world.
Yes.
This idea of, America first is so silly to me because, all right, great. Maybe in like 1918 that worked. For the last 100 years, we've lived in a global world where economies connect and they collaborate. Sometimes they exploit each other, and honestly, the American economy has usually been on the winning side of that exploitation.
Yes.
So for you to think that it's time to reverse that, rewind, undo the last 100 years. It's not going to be undone. What you're just going to do is you're going to cause a lot of suffering and a lot of chaos to the people who have, learned, grew up, have always, not even learned, just their whole lives. They've lived in a global world.
Yeah.
We're not going to become tribal and regional without hurting a lot of people. And by a lot of people, I mean us. I mean the people listening to this. I mean, it's the only people who will float above this are the people with the resources to do that. And I am not wealthy.
Right.
I'm okay.
Like unless you are of the top 10 of we know who they are on that list, that are benefiting from this. Like, I mean, the scary thing is we're in an oligarchy, right? And so we're headed towards this thing. But yes, I think people often say, well, it affects those other people first. I'm like, we are those people. I mean, yes, I am certainly not in the situation of the first tier of people that this is affecting, which is the underprivileged, the oppressed that are always being oppressed, people who can't afford their next meal. And rightfully, there are things we need to do for our fellow humans, but we're still those everyday people. You and I are not,
It's somebody who makes $500,000 a year is infinitely closer, not infinitely, but is 1,000 times closer to somebody who's making $50,000 a year than somebody who's making $1 billion.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand is that
are you a billionaire?
We are together. Yeah. If you're a billionaire and you're listening, please support the Walam Kung Fu Temple and at Jason Chu Music on Venmo. If you're not, you are much closer to an unhoused person, to an undocumented immigrant than you are to a billionaire.
Yeah. And also not just the closeness, but if you look around at who's doing the work around you in your community that is making it function, it is likely those humans.
Yeah.
They're the ones painting the houses, coming to fix things and all of it, right? All of the work that's being done in your community is likely being, other than that damn Amazon package that shows up all the time. But the workers are the workers, right? Yes. But at the same time though, if you really look around, I'm like, who are we trying to get rid of?
It's the people who actually make this country function.
Yeah, I'm very confused because I'm like, no, I need all these people in my life. I can't do I don't have any of those skills, right? And also the heart and the work ethic, and it's infuriating. So love that we can have this conversation and just be all over the map and just be able to kind of to really discuss this, because I've been, Oscar and I have been kind of focusing a lot on martial arts and philosophy because it does interplay with our belief and what we have. But because all of this has been so, the stream of information coming in about, our Walam family member and just kind of what's been happening to them and with his sister, I saw your post, where you started to kind of talk about, wow, this, now that it's in the news, people believe it's happening, but then they don't believe it's happening. And it's weird. It's like when things go mainstream media, I don't know what the number is. 50% are like, wow, this is really happening now. And other have, this is obviously this is real, right? It's not happening to real people. I was like, this is happening to real people. And thank you for talking about it with me. I really appreciate it. And I think listeners need to know, this is the reality we're in. But it is not without hope. Because we're still alive, as we said at the beginning of the podcast. We are still alive. And as long as you and I are alive, you keep rapping and doing the idea architect thing, and I will keep doing whatever it is I do.
The many things you do. The many things you keep doing. Yes.
But appreciate you as always. I am so thrilled that we were able to do this in person.
It's awesome.
I mean, you and I have been very fortunate. We've actually got to hang out quite a bit in the last few years, here and there, whether it's in Florida or here in LA, but we haven't recorded a podcast in person. And then I have to say, there's an ongoing joke with my lovely Canadian cousins, but every time I get under a blankie this on the couch, I usually fall asleep. So that just means the company here is so, gripping and I'm
glad you didn't.
I did not fall asleep. This was just exciting.
It would be much more awkward if you were just there asleep. And I was talking to your camera, so thank you. for keeping me company and always for chatting.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. Jason Chu, everybody.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram or Facebook.